This is a Fox News alert. I'm Brett Baer. Iran in the news tonight on two fronts. This is the first day of the Islamic Republic's new nuclear deal with the West. And late this afternoon, the United Nations withdrew its invitation to Iran to participate in this week's Syria peace talks in Geneva. The offer sparked outrage among the Syrian opposition and here in the U.S., leading to threats of last-minute withdrawals. The invitation withdrawal is thought to be an effort to salvage the talks. Today, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad met with his delegation to the conference. Iran said it would not abide by the Western plan for a transitional Syrian government without President Assad, and that led to the UN taking back its invitation. Meantime, Iran's nuclear deal with the West that has caused a widening rift between President Obama and his own party is in effect tonight. The U.S. and its allies get promises about Iran's uranium enrichment. Iran gets a major break on crippling economic sanctions. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen on day one.
From Iranian state-run media came first word that the Islamic Republic has begun living up to its end of the nuclear bargain it struck with 6 world powers, including the U.S., back in November. Inspectors from the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency arrived at the Natanz nuclear facility and confirmed that both there and at the facility in Fordo, Iran disconnected the cascades of centrifuges that have enabled it to enrich uranium to the 20% level, and that the regime, as promised, has begun mixing down and diluting its stockpiles of uranium already enriched to that level.
Iran has implemented the nuclear-related measures set out in the agreement, and we have adopted the necessary legislation to suspend certain sanctions for a period of 6 months.
Indeed, the European Union and the United States moved in tandem to lift sanctions on Iran's access to petrochemicals, gold and precious metals, and they also eased Iran's sale of crude oil, which had shrunk by 60% over the last 2 years. What's more, Tehran will receive by month's end its first installment from long-frozen overseas accounts, a down payment of $550 million toward an eventual reclaiming of $4.2 billion. As the head of Iran's Atomic Energy Agency declared, the sanctions iceberg is melting.
It's the collapse of the psychological aspect of the sanctions. This means they can no longer keep loosening and tightening the sanctions as they please. And other countries, such as India and China, and these countries who claim to be superpowers, will no longer let America keep imposing its will on them.
Iran and the 6 world powers now have until July 20 to negotiate a final accord that would define the parameters of Iran's nuclear activity once and for all. If they fail to reach such a deal, the terms of the current accord expire.
That's the beauty of this deal. We're buying their compliance with their own money. It's a fraction of what they need.
This fellow Rouhani, who is the guy we're doing the deals with, he's absolutely determined not to eliminate the infrastructure that his country has put into place for the purpose of getting a nuclear weapon. And indeed, that's what this deal does. It leaves all of it in place.
As for the final deal, a senior Obama administration official said today the talks are aimed at seeing if Iran can be allowed to keep a limited enrichment program such that the regime cannot, quote, develop a nuclear weapon without the international community having a long lead time and notice in advance. Brett.
Okay, James, thank you. It has taken a while, but a story Fox News first brought you in early December about possible Russian involvement in the Edward Snowden leaks is gaining traction with new information tonight. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has the latest.
A source familiar with the Edward Snowden case tells Fox News that investigators do not believe the NSA leaker stayed at Hong Kong's Mira Hotel as he traveled from Hawaii to Russia last summer, but rather at the residence of a non-Chinese national, possibly a Russian, who is suspected of facilitating Snowden's travel to Moscow, where he now has temporary asylum. The new allegation about Snowden's unusual contacts in Hong Kong comes as the leadership of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees claim the NSA leaker may have had help. On the Sunday talk show, Senator Dianne Feinstein for the first time publicly weighed in on the possibility, along with the CIA's former deputy director, though neither pointed to specific evidence.
The disclosures that have been coming recently are very sophisticated in their content and sophisticated in their timing. Almost too sophisticated for Mr. Snowden to be deciding on his own, and seems to me he might be getting some help.
You agree with Chairman Rogers that he may have had help from the Russians?
He may well have.
We don't know at this stage.
The claim that Snowden may not have acted alone was first reported by Fox News in early December, based on an interview with Congressman Mike Rogers. On Sunday, Rogers went further.
Some of the things that he did were beyond his technical capabilities. Raises more questions. How he arranged travel before he left, how he was ready to go. I believe there's a reason he ended up in the hands, the loving arms of an FSB agent in Moscow. I don't think that's a coincidence.
The Mira Hotel did not respond to Fox's questions about Snowden, nor did journalist Glenn Greenwald, who's handled most of the leaked NSA documents. In December, Greenwald described Rogers' original claims as baseless. The NSA debate now moves to Capitol Hill, where Attorney General Eric Holder will testify next week before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Its Democratic chairman suggested on Fox News Sunday the president's reforms do not go far enough.
There's going to be a lot of questions, again, from both Republicans and Democrats who are concerned that we're going too much in the privacy of Americans.
By trying to appeal to all sides in the NSA debate, the president may have increased the likelihood of dramatic legislative action because the push to rein in the NSA is one of the few bipartisan issues on Capitol Hill, and Mr. Obama's speech did not put that controversy to rest, Brett.
Catherine, how serious are these threats to the Olympics, and what's the U.S. doing about them?
Well, Fox News confirming tonight that U.S. counterterrorism operatives are aiding the Russians in their search for as many as 4 women who may be suicide bombers. An intelligence bulletin reviewed by FoxNews.com includes these photos of a 22-year-old suspect said to be the widow of a jihadist killed by the Russian security services. The woman may already be inside the Olympic security zone. Doku Umarov, you see here, leads the Islamist group known as the Caucasus Emirate, and there is a connection to the Boston Marathon bombings. Tamerlan Tsarnaev posted photos of Umarov on his YouTube channel, and Tamerlan went to the region, though it's not publicly known whether he trained with the group. The State Department is taking the unusual step of warning Americans that the Games are an attractive target for terrorists, and just within the last few minutes, the Pentagon is confirming that it's moving 2 Navy ships to the Black Sea to be available for evacuations or other contingencies in support of Russian security, Brett.
Catherine, thank you. Another day of serious violence in Ukraine. Anti-government protesters clashed with police again in Kiev. That followed a night of vicious street battles after the government pushed through a sweeping anti-protest law. Ukraine has been in turmoil since the cancellation of an economic treaty with the European Union in November. President Obama says marijuana is not more dangerous than alcohol, but he does not necessarily want his 2 children to follow in his footsteps of teenage pot use. It's just the latest mixed message from an administration that still considers marijuana illegal, but encourages states to go their own way. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry has tonight's story.
All President Obama was rolling today were burritos, a service project at D.C. Central Kitchen to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Yet in an interview with the New Yorker magazine, he suggested rolling a marijuana joint was not much different from cigarettes, saying, quote, "As has been well documented, I smoked pot as a kid, and I view it as a bad habit and a vice. Not very different from the cigarettes that I smoked as a young person up through a big chunk of my adult life. I don't think it is more dangerous than alcohol." The president's administration, though, based on a 1970 law, still classifies marijuana as a Schedule I controlled substance with high potential for abuse, in the same category as drugs like heroin and ecstasy. The president went out of his way to stress pot is not for kids, saying it's not something I encourage, and I've told my daughters I think it's a bad idea, a waste of time, not very healthy. Voters in 2 states, Colorado and Washington, approved referendums in the 2012 election legalizing marijuana for adults.
I have to say that there was one question that was voted on that ranked fairly high, and that was whether legalizing marijuana would improve the economy and job creation.
The president declared it would not grow the economy at an online town hall meeting in 2009. And more recently, he and Attorney General Eric Holder have said they have bigger fish to fry than challenging state laws on this and want to make federal laws more fair, especially for the poor and minorities. The president also touched on the complicated issue of race in the series of interviews conducted over the last few months with New Yorker editor David Remnick. Mr. Obama declaring, quote, "There's no doubt that there's some folks who just really dislike me because they don't like the idea of a black president. Now, the flip side of it is there are some black folks and maybe some white folks who really like me and give me the benefit of the doubt precisely because I'm a black president."
Now, that came as the president discussed the series of issues from health care to Edward Snowden that have dropped his poll numbers. He clearly believes race is at least a factor. As for Snowden, he again repeated it's an active investigation that he can't comment on, but this time he added, "I do not have a yes-no answer on clemency." Brett?
More on this with the panel. Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. Up next, the surprising truth about President Obama and the income gap. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 42 in Omaha, where at least 10 workers at a food processing plant were injured in an explosion and building collapse this morning. KCPQ in Tacoma, Washington, with the reaction to the post-game outburst by Seahawks cornerback Richard Sherman following Seattle's win over San Francisco in the NFC title game. Did you see that one? The Seahawks play Denver in the Super Bowl. And this is a live look at Atlanta from Fox 5 there. The big story there tonight is the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. As always, a commemorative service was held at Ebenezer Baptist Church where King once preached. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.